Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. I'm Junaidah Zeno and my presentation today will focus on consumer-related laws in Malaysia and the commercial activities of entrepreneurs in e-commerce platform. My presentation will be divided into three sections. I will begin with a brief introductions before explaining the three key issues highlighted in my paper, namely the registration requirements, false and misleading marketing practices, and consumer guarantees. Finally, in the discussion and conclusion section, my paper discusses three possible alternatives to address the key issues. It is well known that, unlike businessmen, entrepreneurs create a new market for his or her innovative product. They have the ability to identify a business opportunity and turning ideas into actions. While entrepreneurs are often praised for their contributions in terms of creating job opportunities and improvement of education, they also face some risks, which among others related to the law. Therefore, by using doctrinal methods, my paper focuses on the applications of consumer law in regulating entrepreneurs in e-commerce. My first issue is on the registration requirements. There are several business options for entrepreneurs, such as sole proprietorship, partnership, company, or limited liability partnership. And depending on the type of business they set up, entrepreneurs must register their business according to the relevant statutes. That is whether the Registrations of Business Act 1956, Companies Act 2016, or Limited Liability and Partnerships Act 2012. Nowadays, all online businesses that generate profits have to register their business. Of course, registration will benefit key market players. The business will have a legal entity status and able to execute contract with third parties. For law enforcement authorities, they can use the registration details to monitor the market, and for consumers, on the other hand, the registration details will make it easier for them to identify who are the parties dealing with them. However, the main issue here relates to sole proprietorship. The penalties for failure to register are quite heavy, namely up to 50,000 ringgit and imprisonment. But not all entrepreneurs sell consistently online. The most obvious example are those who use their social platform like Facebook to sell their products. Some of them only sell on a regular basis. So from a legal point of view, the question here is whether these entrepreneurs also need to register in accordance with the relevant law. I use the current example of face mask here. Some people experience discomfort wearing a face mask, especially for long periods of time, such as irritations behind the ear and face chafing. Therefore, some entrepreneurs have come up with the idea of face mask extender and selling them on their Facebook. Of course, they also generate profits online, but there is legal uncertainty as to whether they also need to register with the Companies Commissions of Malaysia, especially if they only sell a few times. There are several provisions under the Consumer Protection Act that entrepreneurs must observe when marketing their products in e-commerce. Firstly, entrepreneurs must not give false or misleading representations and engage in misleading conduct. This prohibition relates to the key features and nature of the products. For example, an entrepreneur who produces face masks claim that they are waterproof and of higher quality than regular face masks. If it is not the case, then there is a tendency that the entrepreneur has violated Section 9 and 10 of the CPA. Secondly, bad advertising is also an offense under the CPA. For example, showing attractive prices to get consumers into clicking the product. In this case, the attractive prices are usually unavailable, and consumers would then be offered similar but more expensive products to purchase. Thirdly, entrepreneurs are prohibited from offering gifts or free items if they have no intention to provide it as offered. For example, offering free items with the purchase of a particular product, but then charges higher prices than usual or reduces the quantity or quality of the products to be purchased. Next, Section 15 prohibits entrepreneurs from making false claims about the availability of their products. This is because consumers may not be able to make informed choices while under time pressure, as it will push them into making immediate decisions for fear of missing out the product. Examples include flash sales and countdown sales to remind consumers about the limited availability of particular products or of the lowest prices that will end in few days or hours. These practices are not in itself an offense unless it misleadingly implies that the offer is time limited when it is not the case. Lastly is on Section 16, which is demanding payment without the intention to supply the product within the time agreed. Entrepreneurs also need to ensure that their products are safe for consumers. Among others, product safety is assessed in terms of its performance, contents, design, and packaging. In Malaysia, it is for the minister to set standards for goods or classes of goods that are safe to use. For instance, the Ministry of Health Malaysia has issued guidelines related to the standard of face masks that are safe to use during the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, entrepreneurs who have started manufacturing their own face masks need to ensure that their products meet the defined safety standard. Otherwise, if convicted, they can be fined not more than 100,000 ringgit and imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years or to both. Another issue nowadays is on the requirement to disclose full price. Some sellers or entrepreneurs, particularly those operating via social platforms, are still reluctant to display transparent prices of their product. Instead, they typically ask the prospective buyer to message them privately if they are interested, for instance, by stating private message if interested, PM for price or alike, alongside the product displayed. Unfortunately, consumers themselves do not complain when encountered with this situation, thus affecting law enforcement. Apart from the CPA, the same prohibitions can also be found under the Trade Descriptions Act 2011. Basically, both statutes are intended to protect consumers against unscrupulous sellers, especially in digital transactions. This is because, unlike offline transactions, consumers in e-commerce are more vulnerable as e-commerce transaction does not require a physical meeting. Therefore, the inequality of bargaining power is more prominent in e-commerce. For my example, I am using the before and after photos in marketing strategy. This approach is not in itself legally wrong, provided that it represents accurate and factual comparisons and is not done in a way that may mislead consumers. Many software nowadays can be used to edit pictures, thus making the authenticity of the photos used in advertising not only questionable but could also mislead consumers. Unfortunately, some consumers still fall easily to the use of before and after photos. This may be due to sophisticated and persuasive marketing tactics such as the use of testimonials and feedback from past purchases, which are mostly positive. While some reviews may be genuine, it is also possible that those feedbacks are fake and intended to exaggerate the effectiveness of the product. The identity of the reviewer is also questionable. For example, reviews from family members or friends could be biased because they tend to give positive feedback as a sign of support for the business. But after all, it depends on consumers to act wisely against claims that seem too good to be true. The CPA also provides several guarantees to consumers, but for my paper, I focus on first, the requirements that the goods must be of acceptable quality. Secondly, it must be fit for its purpose. For example, face masks offer the wearer some protection. Therefore, unless otherwise specified by the buyer, entrepreneurs selling handcrafted fabric face masks, for instance, should ensure that the mask is fit for its purpose. And lastly, the goods supplied must be as described. For example, if the entrepreneur claims that the hand sanitizer he sells contain 75% alcohol approved by the Ministry of Health, then consumers or buyers must receive the goods as described. Finally, for my discussion and conclusion, I concentrate on three aspects, namely first, about the registration requirements. Lawmakers need to specify the conditions clearly. For example, how often does an entrepreneur has to sell goods online, or how many employees he or she has to qualify for registration. Furthermore, some conventional businesses, such as selling fruits, flour, and vegetables, have been exempted from the registration requirements. Lawmakers may consider using the same flexibility for occasional sellers or entrepreneurs in the e-commerce market. However, leniency in the registration requirements could defeat the purpose of requiring all online business to register. For example, it would make consumers more vulnerable to scammers, especially when it is easy and cheap to set up online presence or marketing products online. There are many avenues available, such as through social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram. Therefore, in the absence of registration details, it would be challenging for law enforcement authorities to track or identify scammers disguised as entrepreneurs. Next is related to raising legal awareness. Here it refers to the awareness of the law among consumers and entrepreneurs. For consumers, they need to know their legal rights to be able to exercise those rights confidently against the seller. However, as revealed by the MDTCA, many consumers made no complaints when having problems with the seller. As a result, this led to an increase in fraudulent trading and causing difficulties to law enforcement agencies to execute the law or to investigate the issue. Entrepreneurs themselves may not be fully aware of their legal obligations, maybe because it is easy to set up an online business and the risk is low too. Therefore, entrepreneurs may be less concerned with what the law expects of them. And some entrepreneurs may be too confident that they will not face legal issues, thus they refuse to invest money for legal advice. And lastly, in terms of enforcement mechanisms, many consumers are unlikely to proceed with legal actions due to cost, time, and lack of confidence and knowledge of their legal rights. Therefore, law enforcement agencies are entities that often have incentives to take actions against unscrupulous sellers. At the same time, they also benefit from their enforcement actions as it will give them more experience dealing with consumers' issues in the future. Monitoring commercial activities in cyberspace is a major challenge for law enforcement authorities. Therefore, to ensure effective compliance, law enforcement agencies need adequate funding to analyze the appropriate measure to regulate the digital market and for consistent monitoring of e-commerce activities. And that brings us to the end of my presentation. And thank you so much for your time and attention today. Thank you. Cheers.